So let's crack on with what today is about. And if you can't see the slides, then pop it in the chat box or unmute yourself and scream, and we'll try and do something about it. But hopefully you now see a slide which is topics. Session 1 is about how to go about locating funding, and I want to try and put across a bit of some knowledge and some experience that I've got with the different types of funding, how you might break down the task of looking for funds, and some of the organisations involved and some of the schemes, and we'll look at some of the major schemes as examples. Session 2, which is next week, is very much linked to session 1. So if you can join session 2, that would be great. Session 2 is about some of the key concepts which I think underpin innovation funding schemes and innovation funding scheme applications. So it's all about improving your chances of success. So this week's about kind of what and where from. Next week is a little bit more about how to make your applications a little bit more successful. A little bit more admin. We are recording this session. We will edit it at the end. So if you don't want your contributions to be shared, let us know and we can edit that stuff out. Keep your cameras on, keep your microphones off for the moment. And we should have plenty of opportunity to exchange information, use the chat box for the moment. So just a picture of a jigsaw puzzle, because putting together your funding strategy for your innovation is very much, in my mind, like putting together the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. The sources of funding for innovation are many and varied. Now, don't worry, we are not going to go into all of these aspects of potential innovation funding. I just wanted to highlight the fact that it's not just all about grants. Now, today is 90% about grants, because we assume that's what you want to hear about from Oxley. But when I'm working with a client, it's very much about what else can we put together? What can we look for to help you fund your innovation activities and the whole journey? There's lots of things on this little jigsaw puzzle that maybe you've thought about, probably you've already thought about friends and family, but maybe you haven't thought about R&D tax credits. Maybe you haven't thought about trade partners as a source of funding, and so on and so on. So I like to work with people in putting together this jigsaw puzzle, but for the moment we are going to focus a little bit on grants, and in particular grants that come from the public sector. Because grants do come from the private sector, and I mean charities and things, but we're going to look mainly at grants from the public sector. But just wanted to highlight that the range and scope for potential sources is quite large. So don't forget these things which can support that, your grant applications as well. Putting it together is a bit like a jigsaw puzzle, because all of these sources have different criteria, best applied at different times, available at different times. So it's very much a kind of a moving picture. Quick last word about R&D tax credits. If you're already underway with your R&D activity or your innovation activity and you've not yet thought about tax credits, then let me know and we'll talk about that either on a one-to-one basis or another session. The money is paid as a sort of corporation tax refund. So if you're at the startup stage, it may not apply. But it's a very useful way of funding innovation activity. It's all about developing an innovation roadmap. So where do you start when you're looking for, the mix of all these different potential sources? Well, one place is actually the government's own website, and I will give you some links today where you can start searching for innovation grants amongst all those other sources. So let's think about innovation grants in particular. Before we do that, what I'd like to do is try and launch a little poll. Now, just to see who else is in the room, metaphorically or virtually, and what your experience is of the grant process of innovation grants to date. So bear with me while I launch this poll. It's the first time I've done this. It also will check who's listening. So have a go at submitting your response to this poll. So you just pick one. I think you can only pick one. Can somebody nod at me if you can see the poll? Excellent. Thanks, Sam. I'm going to do the poll as well. Now, what I can see is some immediate results. So hopefully you can see that results as well. Are you seeing results, anybody, or are you just, yeah? So what it looks like is that we do have a few people. Thanks, Rob, for responding. Yeah, we do have a few people who have got some significant experience with some money won, which is great, because when we go into the breakout sessions, just share a little bit of that experience. As usual, sort of normal distribution, most people have got some experience or little or no. And I do love the honesty of some people have some experience with not much success. Well, that's great, because hopefully by working with each other and working with me, we can improve those chances of success. So I thought that was fun, just really to check your listening and see kind of who's in the room, because with these webinars, it's a little bit hard to do that. So somebody said, tried 4 times, no success. Wow, let's have a look at why not. It might be an honest reflection at some point, but let's try and address that today. And indeed, it was that Rob, I think. Yeah, well done. If you're able to join us next week or a one-to-one, Rob, what I can do is look at some of those failed applications, and we can try and work out, you know, what's going on there. Somebody else got similar experience, so let's try and address that. Great, thanks. Okay, I shall go back to my presentation, but thank you for taking part in the poll. Keep popping those questions in the chat. I'm actually going to be focusing a little bit on the presentation, and hopefully now you should see my slides again. So let my colleague Jordan know if you don't, but I think you can. So let's think about innovation grants. When I'm started on this big task of trying to locate grants for my own business and for businesses that I've worked with, it's quite a daunting task. So, but this is one way that I find useful to break things down. The most obvious way, I think, is geographic. It's pretty obvious, you know, can you find stuff on your doorstep? And obviously that's probably one of the reasons you're talking to Oxlep. And then there's a scale, isn't there, though, with your distance physically and otherwise from those schemes, and they do, you know, go to the international and European, and not just Europe. I've had quite a few clients with success in finding funding grants, mainly in the form of prizes, so that, if you like, they're private sector grants from sources in North America. So, you know, you can launch, so you can look sort of pretty far and wide. The other dimension I want you to start thinking about is, what is the focus of this grant that, you know, and what is the focus of what I'm trying to do? Is it based around a challenge? So my technology, my innovation, does it address any particular challenges? Is it focusing or featuring a particular technology? And I've got some examples there. Is it industry sector or sector focused? Manufacturing is one that I work with quite a lot. And what is the level of innovation in my project or in my tech, my particular situation? Is it groundbreaking? Lots of people think they're groundbreaking when they're not, or is it, let's be honest, a little bit more incremental? Now, the reason I mentioned this kind of breakdown, this kind of classification, if you like, is because this is another way that you can look for funds. So you look for funding schemes, regardless of your technology, perhaps, or innovation, that is addressing, for example, pollution, low carbon, aging population. Or you look for schemes that do address your particular technology, energy storage, or industry, for example. So these just two simple ways of breaking down the task. Okay, I'll start with local and I'll start with the challenge-led stuff. So I'll look for the publicity around people and organizations that are trying to address challenges, and environmental ones are pretty key at the moment. But 18 months ago, there was a flood of money available to address the challenges associated with the pandemic, as you might expect, and quite a lot of our clients benefited from that. So I thought this was useful just as a way of beginning to break the task down. When you've started to get into this mindset, then you might start using search engines. And the most obvious one, and a reasonable place to start, is the government's own business finance search engine, which is a bit clunky, and you do have to filter out a lot of irrelevant stuff. But it's improved over the years, and it's a reasonable place to start, if only to give you a flavour of what's available and the scope of what's available, and to start narrowing down your search. Now, when you're doing your search, not easy to do necessarily, but I would encourage you to think laterally and creatively. So who cares about what you're doing over and above yourself, your company, colleagues, and your friends and family? Because the people that care may be the people that are also able to provide some funding or have schemes that are addressing those things. Who could benefit? What problems are you trying to solve? Look for other people that are trying to get those problems solved or facilitate that process. And one thing we'll talk about later on today is, are there ways to get work done? So rather than only looking for cash or contributions to costs, are there ways that you can get things done by other people and paid for through funding schemes, rather than do them yourselves? Because it's just another part of that jigsaw puzzle to put the overall picture together. Can you align yourself to particular initiatives and trends? Well, at the moment, at the highest level, the government has recently just issued a revised innovation strategy. So have a look at that and question yourself: am I working towards stuff that contributes to that innovation strategy? Because that might lead me on to finding funds. And the last one on that little list is, who could you partner with? Do I really need to do this all by myself or by ourselves? Could we partner with somebody and then increase our own chances of success? So I think what I'm saying here is that the search for funding, you have to kind of open your mind a little bit. If a lot of people say, well, I've had a look and I didn't find anything, that's because their search was too narrow and they weren't thinking creatively about who might be able to support their work. If you are in a very narrow field and you only search for something, using your own terminology and frame of reference, then you're probably, you're going to be lucky to find something. But if you broaden it out and say, well, actually, my work could contribute to this aging population challenge, so let's look there for funds, even though they're not talking about my innovation or my technology. So try and do stuff kind of by the back door, if you like. Okay, so what I'd like to move on now. So that first part of the session was about how to start the process, how to go about beginning to find funds for innovation. And now we'll look at some particular funds, and I'll try and put them in the context of my taxonomy, if you like. So many of you might already be aware of Oxlap's own funds, and the main one that I deal with is the GoCreate Innovation Project Scheme. So I won't go into the detail of it today. We have plenty of stuff online about what this scheme is for. By my sort of way of breaking things down, excuse me, it's a local scheme. So it's only Oxfordshire, so call that regional or local if you like. It's open to everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're a complete startup or as sort of an established business. And we get a lot of early stage people applying for this scheme. And it's open to any technologies or any innovations, including process innovation rather than just hard technology innovation. The level of innovation that we look for, I would say, to be honest, is modest. You don't have to be groundbreaking. You don't have to be changing the world. You have to be bringing a new product or service to market, and you're simply looking for some help with the costs of doing that. It's best thought of, my fourth bullet point there, as a retrospective contribution to external costs of innovation. That's a long sentence, I'm sorry about that. An external cost of innovation activities. So that is my way of summing up what the scheme. If you're spending money, not on yourselves, but on other people, expertise, prototyping, services, and you're intending to do that, and you'd like a contribution back for those costs, then think about this scheme as giving a contribution. Periodically, Oxlap does have other monies available. We've had a lot over the last year or two because of COVID. We've had capital grants, but they are expended at the moment. And there is support available for other activities such as investment readiness. At the moment, this particular moment in time, I'll be honest, Oxlap hasn't got a lot. So look at the GoCreate scheme. But if you get onto our email lists, you'll find out more about things as they come on, and it's worth a periodic look at the website. If you're wondering what Oxlap's GoCreate scheme will cover, as I said, it's pretty broad. So have a look at some of the case studies that we've prepared, because they would give you a really good feel for what the scheme's about. Now I'll move on to one of the other main sources of funding for innovation in the UK is an organisation called Innovate UK, and it's part of a family of organisations called UK Research and Investment and Innovation. So Innovate UK on my taxonomy is a national scheme, nationally available schemes, does have both open and challenge-led competitions, and it's looking generally for a higher level of innovation quotient, if you like. So it's not like our scheme can support incremental innovation. Innovate UK generally are looking for more disruptive or groundbreaking stuff. And I'm sure some of you have got experience of Innovate UK, so I'd like to move on reasonably quickly so that we can get to the point where we can share some of that. It's the UK's innovation agency. It's a fairly big organisation. That's what it's there for. It has governance from industry, which is a good thing. It's not just sort of bureaucrats. And it considers itself an investor. It doesn't always ask for the money back. It does have some loan schemes as well. But if you think about it, it is looking for a return on its investment, and that's a return to the UK economy or in solving problems. Mainly delivered through what it calls competitions, but it does also lend and it does also procure. So we'll talk about that later on, because that can be a really powerful way of getting hold of significant funding. And you can find out what's available at any point in time through this link. Now, you will get these slides, by the way, I should have said that, with these links, so you don't have to make note of these if you've not already pursued Innovate UK. And the Innovation Funding Service is also the way through which you make your applications. So there's a search engine looking for funds, and then when you find something, you make it through an online process. Innovate UK projects or projects suitable for their kind of support. It's not basic research, so it has to have strong market potential and be a little bit nearer to the market. I'm going to talk about more of this next week, but I will leave you with the knowledge, if you like, that these slides are available to you after the workshop, because I'd rather move on so that we can cover more schemes. But I do have knowledge of Innovate UK and what they're looking for, generally speaking. The key thing is that bottom one. Your idea must be demonstrably and significantly different from anything that's been developed in that area to date, and you have to prove or demonstrate that. And if you can't, then I would think it's worth not wasting too much time, because it's a highly competitive environment that you're entering. The GoCreate scheme that I spoke about from Oxley, not too competitive. So get your applications in as soon as you can. Innovate UK, highly competitive, simply because of the volume of applications that they get from around the country. I won't go through this process. It's available to you afterwards. Let's talk about one of the most accessed schemes, most readily available if you're just starting out. It's a scheme which they've fairly recently rebranded as SMART, the SMART scheme. It is for disruptive innovation, so you have to be sort of reasonably up there in terms of qualifying as bringing something significantly new. Whether it's game changing and is going to change the world, it's questionable. And it does have to have significant market potential. So they will fund early feasibility studies all the way through to what they call industrial research and experimental development. Now, you have to go and look at the definitions of these different, these are Innovate UK's descriptors of different parts of the innovation process, and you have to tell them where you think you are in that process. Highly competitive, but open to any industry sector or technology area and different sizes of business. The next deadline is approaching fast, but in my view, if you've got a lot of the argument already together and the material, it's very possible you could still make an application into the SMART scheme by that deadline. And I might be able to help a little bit. I'm not supposed to help directly on applications. That's supposed to be some sort of double funding or conflict of interest. But yeah, I can talk to you about your project and whether it fits with the SMART scheme. And you can see there highlighted the kind of contribution rates that you can get back, so contribution to costs, and those costs can include your own staff salary cost, unlike our scheme, which can't. So if you think you might have something suitable for SMART, let me know and we'll talk about it quickly. Innovate UK has a lot of other schemes, and they're basically sort of organized into to different groups according to the source of the fund. So the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund is the biggest one, and it's a collaborative R&D sort of fund. So when you move beyond open schemes like SMART, you're generally talking about innovation schemes which support collaborative activity. So this is where you work with partners, some of whom may be from the knowledge base, to put together a project to attract some funding. But the funding is, now we're getting into the more significant levels of funding. Quite a few of our clients have had success in these kind of projects. So, if you're involved, share that knowledge. You may be a small partner in a big team. If you'd like to get involved, let's talk about it. The way to get involved is through beginning to network, if you like, beginning to find out about the schemes and then talk to these scheme organisers. And you do that through this organisation largely called the KTN, Knowledge Transfer Network, and I'll talk about that soon. It's a big network. It's a little hard to penetrate to begin with, but when you get into it, you'll start to find the people working on similar things. Now, these other schemes, knowledge transfer partnerships, I'll talk about that. That's a way of getting work done, but it's funded by Innovate UK. We have a whole webinar that we deliver on KTPs, and I'm happy to talk to people about that. It's a way of working with a local institution or indeed an institution outside of Oxfordshire on a strategic development innovation project. I mentioned that Innovate UK sometimes acts as a procurer, and that's through this thing called the Small Business Research Initiative, SBRI. That's when they're looking to get particular work done, and they will pay quite often 100% of costs. And we saw quite a few recently coming through that route or similar route for COVID. And we also saw with schemes quite a lot at the moment around healthy aging, which is obviously a long-term challenge for the country. Innovate UK also make loans. They have accelerators and catalysts, so it's quite a complex network, but investing some time and effort in there is a way that you can begin to locate funds. So the knowledge transfer network is a way in, finding partners, understanding the landscape, and beginning to sort of identify those fundings. Now I'm going to talk about two more schemes quickly, just an example of non-Innovate UK, although Innovate UK is quite often involved. And then we're going to go into little breakout groups. And what I think I'll do during the breakout groups is I'm going to have a look at the chat that's been coming through, if I'm able to do that, because I've heard some questions being posed or comments, and thank you for that. So here is an example of a funding scheme which is very much aimed at addressing a particular challenge and supporting a particular industry or segment, if you like. It's a nationally available scheme, and it's looking for a reasonable level of innovation. Now, Clipper Automotive is a client of ours. They have been successful in the scheme and managed to raise, if you look right down to the bottom of the slide, quite a lot of money with an okay level of what we call match funding, so what we call an intervention rate. So it's basically looking at the low carbon electric vehicle market and specialist vehicles coming forward. So, it's an example of, yes, I'm in that niche. I will target that funding in particular, find out when the next call for proposals is coming and start lining myself up and fit it into that jigsaw puzzle. It's only one that I mentioned. There are other networks, there are other sort of industry and challenge-led schemes that come through. You'll see Innovate UK is one of the funders, but not the only one in this particular scheme. Here's another one which a lot of people don't often think about, which is funding available for projects which address defence and military applications. But when you think about defence, it's not just military, it's also security more broadly. So we might be talking about cyber and other kinds of sorts of security challenges that the country is facing. So not just MOD. One of the beauties of this particular scheme is it's 100% funding. They do themed competitions and open calls and help clients quite a lot if they think they've got something which can address a defence or a security challenge. So that's just an example of where if you go back to what I was talking about being creative, well, not many of my clients are targeting MOD. There's no pun intended there, but what I mean is they don't think their technology is suitable for a defence or a security application, but maybe it is. And if you're okay with the ethics side of this, security is where a lot of attention is obviously being placed, and money is available. So what I've covered off to date so far is how do you start the process? Where do you start looking? Something about our own scheme, and then a little bit more about Innovate UK and their schemes, and then a couple of examples of other non-Innovate UK types of schemes that are being promoted by other networks and organisations in the country. And I'm going to suggest, to give myself a break and to give you a chance to meet some of your colleagues, that we go into sort of short breakout groups in a minute, and my colleague Jordan is going to help us do that. So what I suggest you do in your breakout group, which will only be, I think, 10 minutes long, very brief introductions, agree a rapporteur, but we may not have time to call on all the rapporteurs. What I'm mainly concerned is that you get an opportunity to share some experience or knowledge of schemes and organisations that you've tried or have found either helpful or not. And rather than go into the detail of those schemes and organisations, what tips can you share with each other about locating and finding them in the first place, and then managing that search activity? At the next workshop, we'll have an opportunity to talk about tips for being more successful. But this one's about how do you find the stuff in the first place. Be prepared to share. We won't have a lot of time for this, and I'll have more content to move on to, but we wanted to give you this opportunity to at least meet some of the other people taking part in the event. Hi everybody, coming back.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you everybody for rejoining us, although you probably had no option. Hopefully that was useful, if rather quick 10 minutes, but I find that with these webinars, there's so little opportunity to actually, at least exchange a couple of bits of information and contact points if you want to. So now what I'm going to suggest is that according to the normal format of this session, we try and wrap things up around 12 in case people have to go, and then carry on the discussion for as long as people want to, up until 12:30. And I have got a few more slides that I would like to go through. But before we do that, if anybody in their groups had, a real sort of light bulb moment and something that they would like to share, then please unmute yourself and put your camera on if it's working. Don't worry if it's not. And share that. Is there anybody that would like to do that? Yeah. Fizzer, is that right? If I see, yeah, go for it. Yeah, just unmute yourself and
Yes, no, it was nice talking to other people. Obviously, it's nice to know that obviously you've got organisations whereby if you join them, like the knowledge transfer partnership people, they were on about actually, getting help to write your proposals from, I think it was Grantified, and also knowing that, that it's a process. It's not simply done. And if you're looking at finding some leads within your industry, then firstly, initially, if you've written some kind of blog, and aimed it at your target market area, that will give you a good media platform whereby you can really sort of, make some contacts as well. So making some right contacts in the right industry by just simply writing a blog would be beneficial to any organization out there. Connecting with the right organizations. I know that UKRI have eligibility criteria for organizations to join them. I don't know if yourself or someone would help in that process. I think that's a worthwhile cause. Also, if you've registered with your own industry body, I think it's nice to become registered members of other professional bodies, such as, say, the Operational Research Society. So that's quite helpful. It's explaining, it's connecting yourself to other people, it's giving you an overview of the research industry. So I'd strongly recommend that. And those were the things that were highlighted in our discussion.
that's fantastic. If you want to mute yourself again, just there's a bit of echo there, fizz a bit. And that's fantastic. And thank you very much for that. There's actually a few things I'd love to follow up on. I'm going to follow up on working with organisations like Grantified. I'd like to discuss that in the open forum, if I may. Very much agree with you. It is a process, and like with a lot of processes, you can get better at it. So yes, it's a bit hard to practice, if you like, but you can improve the process. And use of professional bodies, hadn't thought of that myself, but go very much another route into potential funding, if not partners and networks, contacts. Because I think you're right, it is about connecting. So we'll talk a little bit more about how we can connect. Is anybody else burning want to unmute themselves? I can't see any hands up or waving hands and nodding. Oh yeah, Liz, do you want to? And Liz, you had a question which I was going to address as well, but do you want to go now, Liz? Yeah.
I think one of the interesting aspects of putting this together, which I think we need the support with, is when you put in an application, you actually almost have the business plan in place to take it forward, and actually to say how much money you need and robustly put it together is as much a part of applying for the grant and having that clarity. And just one thing I've been working at, just because we were talking, most of ours had something within the UN SDG goals area, is to look at the B Corp purely as a method of putting together a business plan that gives you clarity about your workers. And just as a final sort of thing, so for instance, the aha moment for me has been to look that actually most people would like to think were participants actually would much rather be volunteers. They're older people, they haven't got a job, but they actually have quite significant conditions, but they're trying to brush them off and be distracted, and they can't work because of those illnesses, conditions, age-related situations, but actually they need help as much as young people starting a career, because they've, so there's a vulnerability there in the aging society. So we'll talk more, I'm sure, but
yeah, no, that sounds interesting. Thanks, Liz. And you had a question about what would be success, what would be defined as. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
But the point that you made about clarity, absolutely. One thing that funders, whether they're private sector grants, venture capitalists, whatever, they can see through ambiguity straight away. And to be honest, if you were looking at somebody else's application, you could probably do the same. you can see the bits that are just a bit woolly or confusing. And so we'll talk next week about how to, avoid that kind of ambiguity and how to sharpen things up. But that's really useful. Thank you, everybody. What I'm going to suggest is I'm going to move on and run through fairly quickly the remainder of my slides. I hope you can stay with us, everybody, and then stay on for a little bit as well after that. So you should now have the slide, which is the breakout group slide. So Liz, can you nod to me if you have? Excellent. Yeah, good stuff. So, okay, I said that one thing that you can do is start with the government's own search engine. And another thing, and we've also talked about networks and organizations like the Knowledge Transfer Network, the KTN, and all its various arms. And I think it was mentioned a good idea in the feedback there was, professional organizations and societies. Where else could you look for knowledge about what's going on? Now, one thing that I've been using recently, just wanted to bring to your attention, is this magazine, which I have no shareholdings in or anything like that. But I find it really helpful. This is a screenshot of the electronic version of the magazine. I don't even know whether they produce it in hard copy anymore, but they certainly used to. What you get, I can't scroll down, but what you get is a really good, well-written, I think, examples of what people are doing and how they are funding what they're doing. And they love to talk about success stories. And if you go into this magazine, you'll find quite a lot in the local area of companies that have benefited from grants and benefited from other sorts of innovation funding. So as well as you hearing about how people are using schemes, you get a bit of an insight into the schemes themselves. And you just follow that trail and you go and see if you can find the source of the funding and their original information, and dig into it to find out when the next stuff might be coming up. So that's something that I use, because just doing web searches, without some sort of structure is a little bit demoralizing, to be honest. Just wanted to talk about some other schemes. Regional ones. Hopefully some of you have been involved with something called Ox Futures, which is again a challenge-led fund, but fairly accessible, modest level of grant, 50-50 basis. Will fund the early feasibility stuff as well as in implementation, and is currently available, I think. So, it's worth looking at that if you're working in the field of environmental or low carbon. And again, think creatively about whether what you're doing does contribute. Similarly, the Oxfordshire Green Tech Network and other of those organisations listed there, get on their mailing lists. They're all electronic these days. Get onto their email lists, and you will have to filter out, but you will find information about schemes that are coming up, and hopefully in advance to give yourself time to get involved with them. If you happen to be located, although we don't locate ourselves anywhere other than home at the moment, but the incubation centres, innovation centres, the ones that are focused on particular things, for example, they're like digital health, they're another source of finding funding for innovation, because they will be aware of schemes and can bring them to your attention if you're a tenant there or if you're just a visitor. Charities and foundations I'll talk about another time. But get yourself onto these organisations' mailing lists. You can always drop off again if you find that their focus is a little bit inappropriate. Now, I said right at the beginning that as well as cash, what about getting work done? And here's an example of where you are able to get technical work done. to do with materials and other forms of sort of analysis and testing by a local centre of expertise. The University of Oxford has its Begbrook Innovation Science Campus, Science Park, and there's a scheme that runs through there where it's a voucher scheme, so you can get a body of work done by an appropriate scientist or get some testing done by an appropriate service like materials characterization. Now that won't be for everybody, but it's an example of where you can get work done and don't have to do it yourself or fund it yourself. Knowledge transfer partnerships I mentioned before. If you're interested in those, they're competitive, they're strategic, they take time to set up, but they're a very powerful way of getting work done by some young people, typically postgraduate researchers that might end up being, employees, you never know. And there's another national scheme which is about getting work done, which is analysis for innovators, particularly aimed at solving analytical or measurement issues. But there you can see you can get up to 20 days of expert time. Now, if you were to go into the market and pay for that expert time, it will cost you quite a lot of money and also quite a lot of effort in trying to find the person in the first place. Nearly my last slide, and then we'll go into just an open discussion, hopefully. Working the crowd. Just over the last few years, crowdfunding has become a massive source of funding for innovation projects. And I'd like to know, perhaps in the Q&A, whether or not you would find it useful to have a particular session on crowdfunding, because it's matured a little bit. There's, it's still an emerging industry and source of funding, but there are some sort of common models emerging. So you have to be careful now and select the right kind of crowdfunding platform, as well as trying to understand how much money and time you've got to invest in your campaign, for example. So it is an investment, but it's also a very powerful way of both funding funds for innovation and doing some of that innovation itself, if you want to use the crowd in your innovation process. So it may be something to think about in your overall jigsaw puzzle, but crowdfunding has become a bit of an alternative to grants for a lot of people. So just about my final slide is what do you do next? Okay, well, I've got in this pack a couple of links to websites and things where you can start looking. Get yourself, as I've advised, on the various mailing lists for the organisations that appear relevant, and use sources like the Business and Innovation magazine to identify some of those. They'll just mention a little scheme. You can do a web search, you find out more about the scheme, and you never know, it might have a call coming up. KTN, for example, is a wonderful network to join. A little bit tricky to start with, especially at the moment where we don't have many events taking place in person. So a lot of it's online, but you get yourself into the mindset of who else is innovating in your space. One of the problems with innovation applications is when people say, I am unique, because you very rarely are. And there's almost always somebody else working on a similar problem. Now, getting yourself into that sort of network and finding out what other people are doing isn't necessarily going to put you off an application. It's more likely to make your application stronger. If you do your own sort of online searching, then by all means discuss the results of that with me. I don't have the time to do searching on behalf of people, but I'm more than happy to look at the results of searching and say, yeah, I think that one might be good, go for it. And then we look at the investment in time and everything that you'll need to do to hopefully make a successful application. Once you've found something, a lot of people actually don't make use of the guidance which the funder actually provides. And Innovate UK, once you find it, dig into it, they do have a lot of tools to help with making a good application. So you're not totally on your own. There's a lot of good practice which you can draw on. And one of the things that you can do, I suggest there, is have a look at past winners and projects to see whether or not what you're looking at is, you know, in the right sort of environment for your particular project. So there's some help available from me and from the Innovation Support for Business program. And I'm more than happy to talk about stuff that you've found. And next week's webinar will talk about how to make an application more successful. So that's my last slide. So I will stop sharing my screen, and glad to see that quite a few of you are still with us. So it's open forum now. For as long as you want to stay with us, I'd be more than interested to hear some of your experiences. And also, is there any questions which we can immediately address and get into the sort of meat of finding funds for innovation? Hopefully you found the presentation useful, and also the little breakout session. Is there any other, feel free to unmute yourself and pose a question. And in the meantime, I'll be scanning through the chat box. Fizzer, yeah, do you want to go? I can see a finger waving, yeah.
Hi, I've got two questions. Basically, I'd like to register my organisation with UKRI. I'd like some help with that process. There is a project with the Medical Council. It's a public intervention project. I'd like some help trying to obviously reach the correct criteria for it and actually make an application for it. So those were the two things that I had.
Okay, yeah. So the way that I don't think you sort of register with UKRI. What you kind of do is join the various groups and networks that they've got. And then it's a process of to be honest, I think it's a bit like selling, is to, you know, get them interested in what you're doing, try and find the right person, which is not always easy. And then sort of they will hopefully introduce you to the other partners and players. You can register to receive lots of email updates on upcoming schemes and events and things like that. But to get on their radar, you just have to start sort of participating, I think. Once you are on their radar, I do genuinely believe, whether they say this or not, that it will improve your chances of successfully getting some funding and help at some point. There's a lot of organisations involved in innovation in the UK, but you find that, you know, certain ones are quite successful on a repeated basis, and it's because they're good at that kind of networking thing. So anybody else want to comment on that, or has experience of liaising directly with UKRI or Innovate UK? Annie has got her hand up.
Thank you, Peter. I'm not experienced with UKRI. I have a different question. So
okay, yeah, go for it.
Okay, fire away with that. The issue we have is resources, people. We're a very small family business. Is there anybody that can handle all this for us, and obviously specialised in pitching for funding for us for Q&A, software developers, or somebody that can, you know, get paid for their efforts at the end of the if it's successful? Because we don't have time. We're busy juggling many plates, as you know, and have pitched before for funding, but then it's been pulled. So we've kind of invested a lot of thousands into pitching for funding. So now we just want to hand the problem over to somebody else.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Okay, so thank you for that question, Annie. My response to that would be, you can't hand it over completely. That won't work. And Innovate UK will see applications that are written by third parties on behalf of, And hopefully most of those, I think they'll see through that. However, there are organizations that will work with you for a fee. Absolutely. It's, like we're a sophisticated economy and there are suppliers for everything, isn't there? Now, I can't recommend them, not allowed to do that. And probably I wouldn't want to do them, wouldn't want to recommend it either. It's about looking for those organizations online, I think, and there's a few that are quite proactive in reaching out to people.
I looked at the list from Oxley and they all seem to have soft skills. I need specific, C# developer, absolute nuanced skill.
Sorry, are you looking for somebody to help with an application or somebody to help with the work that needs to be done?
We need funding to take our business to the next level. By the way, sorry, I don't have a camera. We're doing the meeting room, but not on my desk. So
yeah, no worries.
We are at the next stage, and we're growing exponentially fast, and we need QAs. But we haven't got time to pitch for the funding. We shut the rig for a couple of days and spent a couple of thousand with a mentor guy to pitch for some innovation funding, and then that's gone on hold, which I'm going to send over to Tracy to find out where that's gone. And then Oxley sent me a list of people that could help, but they were all soft skills, how to get goals, and we don't need that. We need QAs. We need Java writers. We need proper code cutters, and we need Russell Group interns that can test it to the brink of disruption for us, because it's out in the field. We are actually using it to great success with over 100 supermarkets up and down the UK, and we now need funding, but we haven't got time to go get the funding.
Well, chicken and egg. If you can't expect funding without investing some time. So whether it's private sector, public sector, grant, non-grant, it's going to take some investment in time. I think what would be best, Danny, is if we had a chat about your particular project, and then maybe we can start to put that little jigsaw puzzle together of where that funding and the expertise as well might come from. Because I think with what you're trying to do, it might be a project that suits working with a local institution. They might be able to put some money into it, so you can kind of go along that get work done route rather than
please.
just
I'll
grant.
send you the presentation we sent for the Retail Innovation Funding Grant, which is completely wrapped up, and the press release that's going out with it. But at the moment, we're growing too fast, and I need to slow it down while we get the QA side sorted.
Well, that would be worth doing. Your question prompted me to, if it's okay, I'll just talk about the use of grant consultants, if you like, agencies. I've had experience of working for them, with them, and against them. So I would say it's like any purchase of a service. It's very much, caveat emptor, buyer beware. It can be really good. I genuinely believe that if you find the right person to work with, they will improve your chances of success. And I've done it on Innovate UK applications, and I've actually been one of the people that have helped turn an application around from being unsuccessful to successful. And it's not a guarantee, but it is possible.
I agree with buyer beware.
Sorry?
I agree with buyer beware. We were given a mentor, but they spent weeks just describing the water we were drowning in. So I was thinking, can you just get some hands on deck, please? And can you do something instead of telling me what to do? So
yeah, that's right. And I think that goes for grant writers as well. There are some that will just take all your material and knock something up and have only a sort of modest investment in your potential success. And there are others that will take a very, some will work on a no fee basis until you are successful. So, that has dangers as well. I would say that if you can find the right balance and people to work with, some of these agencies are very good, and they're also very good at finding the schemes that you could apply to. But what you do have to guard against is being a bit too arm's length, and you end up with a project and a fund that you actually can't deliver, or a project which doesn't really meet your needs. And I've seen that happen as well. In the past, it was a little bit even more Wild West, I think, and there were people just purporting to get grants for anybody, but they've got a volume offer, and they'll be accepting small fees from loads of people, and most of the time failing, but delivering a report or something like that, which you could just as easily do yourself or get a colleague to do on available funding sources and things. But some of them are very good, and they do have some good experience of what works and what the funders like to look for. So yeah, I don't know if other people have got experience, but I think somebody, Liz, did point out it's a process, and so those agencies can get very good at the process, so they can help you save time and effort, but they don't understand it like you do, so be careful. Yeah, so yeah, anybody else want to? Liz, actually, yeah.
I just wonder if you could say something about creating and forming and finding people, organisations to partner with. It might be relevant to our last speaker. And I'm certainly at that stage of looking for probably an academic partnership to really get us the impact assessment, then the evaluation. I think we spoke about that before. But just knowing how to find the partner that can then give you the leverage in other sectors. I know you know a lot about partnerships as well as grantors, grantors.
Yeah, well, finding partners, I mean, the kind of activity that you were talking about, Liz, where somebody's asked to do an evaluation for your technology or your process, or, I mean, that is a classic one where I would hope we could find an academic partner to do that. It's just a tricky process because we have to fit with their funding and their timescales.
Timescales, yeah.
If you just rock up with a pocket full of cash, they'll have a door wide open. But if you rock up with some cash, but not as, perhaps as much as they'd like to see, then the door's only going to be half open. I'm sorry to be cynical about it, but and at the moment our institutions are struggling with some quite fundamental things as well. But there are gatekeepers, and there are sort of intermediaries that can help, and I'm more than happy to talk to you again, Liz, about whether or not we can package what you're trying to do in such a way that is accessible to them, and then find people that might want to have a conversation.
That would be great.
Yeah, Fizza.
Hi, sorry.
That's all right.
What it's really interesting to know that obviously people are experiencing the same similar type of problems, but obviously within their industry. I found it really challenging because I wanted to do a piece of research on spinal cord injury. I knew that Stoke Mandeville were very interested, but then it was finding the right partnership from a university that was willing to take on the project. The funding was looking at 100,000. Thing is, the guy liked my idea and everything, but it was finding that right sort of partnership within a university environment who was going to be willing enough to do it. I'm in the process of writing a written proposal for it. I'd like to go and pursue it, but it's finding the right connections, which I'm finding really difficult at this moment in time. Another thing was that, again, I'm identifying these potential research projects, but it's the partnership, it's the knowledge, it's the mentoring. So I'd really appreciate some kind of sort of email that I could then send these details to yourself, and maybe you'll have a bit more of an idea of who I am and what I'm trying to do, and maybe guide me in the right manner. That would be much appreciated.
I will put my email in the chat box. Just do that. What I can help with is I don't have unlimited resource to be able to sort of make loads of phone calls on individual clients' behalfs. But what I do have is a bit of my own network, I guess. And also I would look at what you're presenting and maybe tweak it to be something which speaks their language a little bit, because I think that's quite often the problem, is that or the challenge, it's not really a problem, is that you will put something together which is in your language, and that's, why would you do anything else? And then we actually have to sort of put it into their frame of thinking and their language a little bit, and then we can improve the chances that it gets read and gets to the right person. And if you want to send me something, we can work on it together.
Awesome. I'm trying to access the chat box. I usually on Zoom I can do so. On this, I'm having a bit of a difficulty. I don't know why it is.
Well, you can find me if you can't see the chat box. Then I'm not sure why, but there's a menu along the top normally, which is just the conversation. But you can find me via any of the Oxlep emails, and it'll find a route through to me. And I think including the email, which is on the bottom of the slides, that you'll get.
Sorry, I've got it.
Okay.
I've got.
Good. Some people are having to go, which is understandable, because we said sort of 12, 12:30, depending on how much you wanted to take part. But anybody else that hasn't spoken yet, I'm intrigued with Rob has got an Innovate UK application on the go, but in the oven, as it were. Now, I'm technically not allowed to give you too much advice on that, but I between you and me, I can have a look at it, Rob.
Okay. I've got something I could send in, so yeah, just a little bit of guidance, that'd be great. Okay.
Yeah. I'm more than happy to do that, because one thing that we will talk about next week, and it's a really obvious thing, is that if you're writing an application for anything, including a grant, get somebody independent to have a look at it. Now, I'm sort of semi-independent because I know about grants, but get somebody else to have a look at it. And if it doesn't make sense to me or them, then there's, you were going to struggle. And SMART is a great scheme. I've had probably 3 or 4 projects over the years with various clients and on behalf of my own company. And it is a good scheme, but they do need certain things, and you have to provide those things so that they can tick that box and move on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Cheers.
Anybody else still with us would like to? Oh, Malika has got a hand up, I think.
Hi everyone. Hi Russell. Yeah, I mean, what I was just going to ask is for that Innovate UK application form. I haven't done any yet, but just wondering, since you mentioned whether we could just send it, then if you could just have a look. I mean, it's a production topics that I'm doing right now. And it's a life coaching through production. So how do we get your email? I heard Fiza was saying that from the top you mentioned to get your email.
My email's in the chat.
Okay. All right.
Or I think Teams called it Teams calls it conversation.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Or you can email me anywhere, or you can email Oxlap and just say, please pass this on to Peter Russell.
Yeah, I can see Peter Russell. Yeah, I've got it here.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was really good, useful session.
Good.
Thank you.
One thing I would say, Malika, and this is for everybody.
Yeah.
Innovate UK doesn't have application forms anymore, generally speaking. Oxlep is one of the only organisations that still does, I think. But so what you will see is an online application process.
Okay.
And what you can do though is you generally, what happens is that you create an account, and you're not submitting that application. You're starting to populate the fields, and you'll see, and it allows you to then print a PDF, and that PDF effectively gives you what you were looking for, which is an application form. And it allows you to sort of edit it, so you can go back in, do more work on it. Increasingly, and Rob, you can nod at me if this is the case, they have word limits. It's quite hard to work with those word limits sometimes, and there's restrictions on what you can add in the way of supporting information as well. But it gives you, if you start to do that, Malika, you'll see effectively what an application form looks like.
Yeah. And then one last thing, I know you've mentioned about that GoCreate fund. Is it on the, we need to submit the application form before every 12th of the month?
No, thank you for asking that one. The next deadline for the GoCreate scheme, top of my head, I think it's either the 16th or the 17th of September. And that is one where you will have an application form you can download from the website.
Okay, lovely.
They've moved, I think, or we have moved, sorry, to a bi-monthly process. So you could submit in September as long as you've got everything ready. And with GoCreate, I am allowed to spend time helping you with the application. I won't write it for you, but I can help you with the application.
Yeah. And then because I thought, so August, they are on holiday right now, correct? There's
there is no submission now in August, and Jordan's just put it in the in the chat, 17th of September, 12 o'clock midday. But hopefully well before that, we can have a conversation about your application.
Thank you ever so much. Really good. Thank you so much, everybody.
Okay. So it's 28 minutes past. Is there anything else anybody would like to wave a hand, make a comment, or yeah, Liz, did I see? You're muted at the moment, I think.
Yeah. Just very quickly, there was another deadline, 25th of August. I can't find it in my notes. What was that for?
That might be the SMART scheme from Innovate UK. Liz, if you're thinking about that, I'd think very carefully. I'm not sure it fits with what you're doing, but we can have a look at it. The work that you do in putting these applications together, by the way, isn't often wasted. You know, you can use that material in other places. So it's worth having a look at, see if you think it fits. But they do tend to like sort of hard technologies rather than sort of process or, you know, softer stuff. But they do, in theory, welcome applications from humanities and social sciences as well. You know, it's harder to demonstrate the innovation sometimes.
I'm probably focusing more on the aging society work now, because that's coming across on so many strands. But
yeah,
and that's, but you know, that, so I'd love to have a session with you if that's feasible again to talk through some of that angles.
Yeah, of course it is. And I noticed when I was looking around yesterday that there's still, well, there was a lot on COVID for obvious reasons. Now the environmental and the aging population stuff seems to be kicking back in.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll get through to the office and see if we can sort it out. Thank you very much, Peter. Appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you. Well, I mean, to everybody that's left, thank you very much for attending. Hope you found it useful. You will get the slides. You'll probably also get a questionnaire or something so that we can gather some feedback. If you'd like to set up a one-to-one session with me, then do that through me directly or one of my colleagues. It's not a problem. And yeah, thank you for attending today.